Hello, my name is Karla McGruder, and I'm the founder and president of Accelerating Circularity. And I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about the work that we do and what it means to have circular systems. So let's get started. So Accelerating Circularity is a nonprofit that creates new supply chains and circular business models to turn textile waste into mainstream raw materials. We have a vision as an organization of a world in which textiles are no longer wasted. The two most important takeaways from this is that we want to create these new models that are essential for the textile industry, and we want to mainstream it. We wanted to create the scalable systems that are allowing this to work. So what is unacceptable is we cannot continue to have the amount of textiles going into landfill that happens today. So the way that we work is we collaborate, and you're going to hear me talk about collaboration and scaling throughout this entire talk because it's critical. And you can see that we have two major projects, one in Europe and one in the US, where we bring together collectors, sorters, pre-processors, recyclers, yarn spinners, fabric mills, brands, and retailers. And this is essential. This is that collaboration that brings everyone to the table, that allows us to understand the needs of each of the nodes in a circular system and what needs to happen for us to be able to make this very important change. So today we're going to talk about textile to textile circular systems, and systems are really at the crux of this. It needs to be a system. It can't be one segment. We can't fix one segment at the same time. We jokingly talk about the need for to create the entire system at once. It's a difficult task, but you can't just have one part of the system to function while the other part doesn't, because then the system doesn't work. So we'll talk about the need. We'll talk about the existing reality today, and we'll talk about the transition that's going to take us to circularity. So the need is pretty clear. We actually put in landfill today somewhere between 92 million tons and 110 million tons. Think about it. 1 million tons is a staggering number, but potentially 90 to 110 million tons. These numbers are outrageous, and they have to stop. We're drowning ourselves in textile waste. It's somewhere between 6 to 8% of all landfill and incineration. So this is what it looks like, right? This is a picture of a collector who's collected a huge amount of textiles that are then sorted and baled. This is a tiny picture of what it looks like in one part of his facility. Now, these are also materials that are collected, right? Which is different also than what goes into landfill and incineration. So these numbers are absolutely staggering. Today, the export business of used clothing is close to $4 billion a year, right? The US, the UK, Europe, China, we are shipping to developing countries, the global south. There's $4 billion there's material flows from one area to the next. That's the existing reality, and that doesn't count what goes to landfill incineration, right? Because these are materials that still are in the market. So you can start to see the size and scope of the problem. So what are we going to do about that? At Accelerating Circularity, we focus on textile to textile recycling. Now, we know that that isn't everything. The market is very clear that the textile use case hierarchy starts with reducing our use of textiles, moves on to reuse, repair, and then recycling. And so there are several steps that you need to take before you get to recycling. However, everybody has to work on a part where they can actually make good progress. So if you look at the lighter turquoise circle on the outside, those are things that we don't work in, right? We don't directly communicate with consumers. We don't are working on resale or reuse. We are focused on that textile to textile system within the textile supply chain. And that is the darker circle. Now, please don't misunderstand us. Those other aspects are first on the use case hierarchy. They are better environmentally. They are better from an economic point of view. But for all the materials that can't go into those other systems, we believe a circular textile to textile system is critical and needs to be developed. So you can see in the dark blue where we look at the typical generation of fibers, right? We put that as fiber companies, yarn spinners, textile mills, and you've got garment manufacturing, brands and retailers. And then you have, you know, if the circle were to continue, textile collection, the sorting, the pre-processing, and the mechanical and chemical recycling. There are times when you are going to need one type of recycling over the other. And you can see with the colors that we've put in here, the dark purple, and that shows you the existing supply chain, and all of those nodes are connected. And then we look at unsold garments in the violet, right? We manufacture garments today, and somewhere between 15 to even 30% never make it to retail. And so those garments also potentially can be a feedstock. And then post-industrial waste, what comes off the cutting tables as you're cutting the garments, those materials are also useful. And you can see, you know, where it's white in the circle, how we need to connect that to create full circular systems. So our process at Accelerating Circularity is we've done research. Who are the potential partners that need to be part of this system? How do we identify those gaps? How do we model systems that might be able to work? These are things that everybody needs to do. Then we need to link those players together. We need to make sure that the appropriate people are in the room. Remember, I talked about collaboration. These are collaboration that needs to happen. And as a do tank, which is what we like to describe ourselves are, we actually have to do things. And for me, when you do, you learn. It's really important. And then we will report out, as you can go to our website and see on our work at different stages. So we have created targets where we want to have 40% overall recycled inputs, right? This isn't perfect. We're not going to be in all cases 100% recycled materials, but it's a matter of moving the needle, start getting materials out of landfill and incineration, start diverting them from places where they might do harm. So of that 40% recycled content, 20% we want to be post-consumer, at least. We'd like to run 50 tons of post-consumer cotton and 50 tons of post-consumer polyester. This is what we were talking about at scale. For us to make this change, we don't want to look at capsule collections. We want to look at this. And we must be able to trace this. We must be able to confirm that this is actually happening and it's not just talk, it's action. So when you start to think about the system ecology, you have to think from the very beginning. And it gets complicated, right? This is further detail than the globe that I showed you earlier, right? We are looking at where the materials are sourced for these potential feedstocks for the textile to textile systems, right? The consumer is an absolute, you know, we're going to hopefully get products out of their closet and avoid having them throw them into landfill. We would like to make sure that brands and retailers on their pre-consumer goods or unsold goods don't dispose of them and incinerate them, which we've seen has happened in the past. And then we've got facilities, right? Our manufacturing places, which will have the post-industrial materials. And now how do those things get collected? They can get collected through a variety of ways. And I'm sure you've participated in some of them, whether you go to some kind of an event where materials are brought in and dropped off. 10 people pick up goods at curbside. Do you drop them off at a recycling bin at a special place, such as a Goodwill or something like that? There are public bins on the streets in some places. There's mail back programs. You can drop things off sometimes in stores, and then facilities have their own collection systems. And who's doing that for us? Municipalities, for-profit entities, nonprofit entities, as we've spoken about a minute ago. And then these are where we start turning these goods, right, post-consumer goods, actually into feedstocks. We have to start sorting them. Now today, the bulk of goods, which you may already be aware of, are sorted for secondhand material use, right? We're, as I mentioned earlier, it's $3.8 billion that are being sold for reuse. And so that's one way that they're sorted, is for reuse. We now need to start thinking about how can we sort them for textile to textile recycling. And there are other things as well. Something that's called wipers, which is when they take used clothing and they cut it into squares, and then it's sold, those squares are sold where they can be used as cleaning rags. And then shoddy, which is where a whole boatload of stuff is just taken, it's ground up, and then it's made into things like insulation. So there's a variety of different ways. Now, when we sort by fiber type, those materials that are appropriate for textile to textile recycling, right? The main abilities to textile recycling today are cotton, polyester, and blends of cotton and polyester. So you see those are the three that we've targeted here. And then once you do that, you then need to pre-process. Pre-processing is taking off buttons and trims. It's potentially laundering it, right? We don't want dirty clothes in our recycling system so that we get new fresh yarns. And then those need to be aggregated, because every step we've gone through now, from sorting by fiber type to detrimming, then starts to have reduced the amount of any one feedstock, right? And the recyclers, the next step in the system, the mechanical recyclers, the thermomechanical polyester recyclers, the chemical polyester recyclers, and the chemical cotton recyclers, they need a flow of materials into their system that allows them on a regular basis to run these recycled materials. Now, if they have a facility that runs 50,000 tons a year, you can imagine the kinds of flows of materials that need to happen. And so this is a sticking point. You can see on the pre-processing and aggregation that that's a pretty tight little funnel that everything has to go through so that it can be feedstock. And once it goes through the recycling, then it can be turned into new fibers and yarns and woven into fabric and turned into new material. So that whole system, you can see that there are many interdependencies. It's a system. It is not one thing is going to solve the problem. You can't collect goods and then just look for the cotton material. You have to pull out as many different kinds of materials so that the collectors have a business case for being able to pull out one product versus another. And when I talked about pre-processing, this is a step that many of you might not be as familiar with. It's pretty easy to understand what the collecting and sorting is. But when we say pre-processing, we mean some very specific things. We talk about cutting off labels and buttons and zippers. We also have to think about, for some types of recycling, like cotton mechanical recycling, if they ask for cotton garments or cotton in general, and the garment has polyester thread, those seams need to be cut out as well, because if you leave the polyester in there and then you want to re-dye it, or just leave it as it is, you might end up getting some differences. You'll get neps, you'll get colors, material that doesn't dye. So even that has to be cut out. And then again, I mentioned earlier the potential that you have to launder the goods. All mechanical recycling is going to ask that you are laundering goods, some chemical recycling as well. We've heard that for cotton recycling, you want to make sure that you're getting all of the contaminants out. And even for recycling where the eventual product wouldn't be affected maybe, but it's for the handling of workers. They don't want to be handling any material that might be contaminated with something. And then even for different recycling types, the format of the materials that go in there might need to be specific. It might need to be cut to a certain size. It might need to be actually ground up. So all of this is understandings that need to happen when thinking about what recycling system that you're developing the feedstocks for. And then it all needs to be aggregated. How do we get enough to flow into the recyclers so that it makes sense for them to use that particular system? And once we do that, we now know that we can create materials. So at Accelerating Circularity, we have actually bought feedstocks, turned it into, recycled it through a recycling system, made new yarns, knit jersey fabric, and made them into t-shirts. We've also taken those feedstocks, right? Cotton, then we've blended it with, we blended post-consumer cotton with post-industrial cotton, and then blended it with virgin material, spun yarn, and was able to both knit jersey fabrics and weave denim products. This is really exciting because this is an example of what can happen when you bring the entire industry together and allow them to collaborate and work on new products. So what we see is that collaboration is the key. You have to support the textile waste hierarchy, right? It's critically important that each of the segments are focused on. While we focus on a specific one, we certainly want to see the reduction of textile use, generally speaking. We want to see reuse grow where and when it's appropriate. And that you have to learn through action. You can't just talk about it. You can't step in one place and hope you'll understand enough to actually make things happen. And so you have to, as you're doing this, identify the textile systems and processes that are scalable now. Because if we don't start moving the needle, we don't start making these products, the wide, high volumes that need to happen aren't going to. So we have to start with where we're from and grow, hopefully quickly. And when people talk about designing for recycling, yes, that's critically important. We need to make sure that the garments that are designed today are able to go into products in the future. But we also have to design from recycling, right? We have to start pulling these things through. An important part of this is the business case for everyone within the system, and that won't happen unless we're actually using those materials. So circular product trials, convening them through the full circular value chain is critically important and at a high scale. So what we've done is we've looked at what the market can do, proven it through trials, and now have brands coming in and asking for more of those products. Those are the solutions that are required to scale a circular value chain. So I thank you for your help, and I hope that this has been useful for you. Thank you for your time.